Howdy, folks. Hmm,
Hello.
Just wait for everybody to bundle in from the lobby. All right, 10 more seconds, then we get cracking. Sweet. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our fortnightly-ish webinar. If you haven't spoken to me before, I'm Dan. If you've chatted to us on Slack or on GitHub, if you're a cloud customer who's had calls before, chances are we have spoken at some point. If not, to anybody who hasn't, hello. Um, my role at Maestro is Maestro Architect, which is a nice woolly term to mean whatever we want. Basically means I spend a lot of my time before working at Maestro using Maestro, sat where you're sat, using Maestro to test things. And now I help other people test things. And so I do a lot of end user support. Sometimes I even pretend I can write code and make changes to Maestro. And I spend time with cloud customers, helping them use our cloud services. And I spend time talking to folks internally about the changes we should make to Maestro or to Maestro Studio to help people who are in your seat do cool things with Maestro. Today, trying to mix up kind of the content that we're putting in some of these webinars. And so today I'm going to do live demos, this time thinking about if I don't have local emulators, local simulators, local Android devices on the ends of cables, and how you would go about still using Maestro to get some testing done, this time using Maestro Cloud and using MCP. Uh, Hastily clauded slides. So, um, these are the bits I intend to cover. So your Claude MD changes, your agents MD, if you're not using Claude, about the kinds of things you would need to do in order to enable that. That is very, very short. It's basically don't try and launch an emulator. Talk about testing after code changes, but also the other kinds of times you might want to start thinking about making doing tests even if you haven't changed code, and then also what might happen coping with failure. Um, for folks who weren't at the last webinar, I will do a very quick intro of the app I've been mucking around with in the last few. So this is a little counter app. It does nothing interesting at all. It is exactly this. That's all it is. I've got a repository running in VS Code here, which is all of the code, but also all of the couple of tests we did in the last webinar, where we were spending our time using the MCP to write the tests, run the tests, and we spent time running them on emulators and simulators. But for this session, we are going to do away with that. Get rid. Um, So prior to the session, as well as opening the repository, I have made some Claude.md changes. Obviously, I didn't make them by hand. I told Claude the changes I wanted. I said that I didn't want to test with local devices and I wanted to test using Maestro Cloud. Um, there's already a bunch of stuff in here about how you might what the rough layout of the repository is and those kinds of things that you might have with an application. But as you get further down, you can see there's a few changes. So we're not going to boot, use, or run against local devices. When you want to use Cloud here, it's already looked at the MCP and it's found the tool it needs to use in order to run things on Maestro Cloud. Um, it also knows kind of where it's going to get its project information. So we've got organization and project ID. So if you've not used Maestro Cloud before, you have an org, and within an org, you have projects. You'll also have an API key, which is going to just use my logged in Maestro user locally. But there's also an API key in env for non-interactive runs. Um, it, Claude decided to give himself some backup options in case the MCP fell over, which I thought was rather sneaky. Um, and so in case the MCP fails, I've already worked out how it is I go about I go about trying to run those tests to be helpful anyway. There's not a great deal in here. I will, as I did last time, I will push this up to GitHub and we'll share after the fact so people can come and look at this repository and see what we've done. So what's here from last time is CLAUDE.md. Last time we did from scratch, going from I'd made the first couple of code commits and then I was working my way up through building tests and running them. And we've got a conversation MD of everything we did last time. Um, but other than that, it's a really boring little React Native app. Cool. So I think what I want to do is probably start with just a nice example. So I've closed the emulator now, but we've got like just a basic plus and minus and reset button. So let's do something of that ilk. Um, Muck around with that screen a bit and make sure that we can test that. So add some webinar example text to the screen. Um, let's make it small and italic. Um, and at the bottom. Um, we want to add a test. Um, and we want to ensure it's below. What was the button? What was the button called? Reset. Your ability to type is inversely proportional to the number of people watching you type. Um, cool. I think that's a long enough prompt. We've got a Claude.md. Should take care of it all. Let's go. And so it's already looking at the application and loading in the two tests from before. It's going to chuck in some example text. I like that. The one thing we don't get with this, so if you were doing all of this locally on local devices, at the point where you start getting to the point of running the tests, you'd use the Maestro's MCP viewer. So for those of you who either came to the last webinar or have watched it on YouTube, or have played with the MCP locally, you'll know that for the last, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you've been able to, when the MCP starts, you get this bit of text pops up and says, hey, you can go and see the viewer, which I can open, but it's going to give you this, which is going to let you see what the MCP is doing with tests on your local device. It's great, but not what we're doing today. Today's is going to look slightly more boring. So it's created a webinar.yaml. We can watch it moving here. So we saw the app changes it was making. Now we see the webinar. So it's gonna launch. It's gonna wait until the reset button is visible. And then it's gonna make sure the webinar example is below reset. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. Um, cool. So it's doing a sensible thing. So before we are running a test, it's going to rebuild the application. Um, The inspiration actually for today's talk has got nothing to do with like try and find something new to talk about. One of the things that I draw on when looking for webinar topics is conversations I have with folks in the Slack community and on GitHub. And obviously, there are a whole bunch of poor folks out there who are using Windows, have no ability to test on iOS. Um, there are folks who are stuck on old versions of macOS and no ability to test on iOS 26. Um, it also occurred to me that perhaps there's some version of MCP stuff that you might even start seeing in pipelines as more and more people are moving kind of small agentic tasks into their pipeline. And so being able to demonstrate that you can do Maestro Cloud as a free form step, a natural language step, in a CI pipeline. Seemed like it could be useful. Um, what's going on so far? So Maestro Cloud Pixel 634, it's running on the cloud. Get the run status. It's installing. Poll again. We can go and see it running. Go and take a peek and see what's going on. Oh, it's already finished. Webinar example down at the bottom. That is nice and small and discreet. Great. Um, and that's the end of the session. Everybody go home. Um, so we've covered the simplest of changes. And we've covered like if we were to run a test in that sort of situation, it is very, very easy to do that. It takes, I would say, marginally longer doing it this way than it would take if you were to try and run it with local devices. Um, the where you start getting real power in all of this is if you start saying, I want to start doing um, parallel tests. I want to start doing, I want to test all of my things on Android and all of my things on iOS, both at the same time. Um, when you're dealing with an application that's slightly less pathetic than this little one that I've made, you've probably got more than three flows. You're probably dealing with, kind of dozens or hundreds, at which point using Maestro Cloud in order to parallelize that probably makes a lot more sense. There are times you're going to want to make changes that aren't going to be quite as simple as I've added I think calling this a feature is probably a little bit charitable. So there's things like regression tests are probably the next thing. What we'll do next. We want to make a change that isn't, so some external change. So we could talk about new operating systems, or dependencies. Maybe dependencies is the way to go. So um, it's been about 4 weeks since I made this. So npm being the great ecosystem that it is, we'll definitely have some fixes by now. So run npm audit fix, then test the application on Android. So what did we do last time? 34. So let's do it on Android 35 and on iOS 26. Cool. So give it some different work to do, but also this is the kind of regression test that you want to be able to kind of get confidence on when you're doing it locally, because whilst you can read the change logs and you can, I mean, and absolutely, when you're running npm audit, absolutely, and changing your dependencies, do read the change logs. I have no idea if this is going to work. But it's testing, and so either result is probably good. But yes, you'd only got some certain level of confidence, and so being able to get some local confidence by using your cloud account to be able to get that feedback, like, is it going to break everything? This feels like this will end up being faster than what I would have done a year ago with updating React Native dependencies or something. The only other thing that I'm going to do, so I kind of want to split this into three. We talked about kind of other kinds of fixes, um, other kinds of changes. It's probably not worth doing another operating system one. So I think what I'll do in a second is I'm going to do a demo where we can intentionally break some tests. Um, I would like to see how Claude deals with, I've got a broken test. I want to evaluate if it's a broken application or a broken test. I'm going to fix, or instruct it to fix the tests or fix the application. I think, and watch it do the full cloud loop. I think that would be kind of handy, because just watching it slowly come up with green ticks is a little bit boring. Mm. So we watched it rebuild the application. It's already running Android, and iOS is still building. Android's all done. Man alive. iOS builds really do take a while. Hmm. I should point out that as of a couple of weeks ago, this kind of loop probably wouldn't have been possible. There were changes that we put into the Maestro release that came out at the beginning of this week in 2.7 that added extra bits to the MCP to allow it to both fetch good. So cloud results were already available, but this gave you rich results and the ability to draw all artifacts down as well. So the ability to describe a cloud run and get its logs and its screenshots and its videos and things like that, and be able to pass those as context into your agent was something new from only a week ago. Nice. Ew. JSON mangled. Right, so here's the upload. So it gave all three of the tests up. Um, Gave it a cute little name as well. We can watch the progress as it goes. So it's screenshotting as it goes, and then as soon as we reach the end of this, it's gonna give us the video.
Hey Dan, can you zoom in a little bit?
Ah, sorry, big screens. Yes.
Thank you.
There you go. Flow's finished, and now we can watch the video in full. If you're ever debugging using the web, you go to download artifacts, and from there, in fact, I can just demonstrate this. So this again is part of recent changes we've made around the around the tooling to be able to expand on the amount of stuff that you're getting when you're able to pull information from a run. So you've got a screenshot at every step of the way, plus a screen recording, a list of the commands that were run, and then the Maestro log representing the tests that were done, as well as the simulator log, or it'll be an emulator log if you're over on there is a manifest that describes all the files, so it makes this a nice, easy agent consumable thing. But that's not just cloud. That's also in the open source Maestro project as well. So if you're doing things if you're running things locally, your local test directory will also contain all of the new improved artifact stuff. Sweet. Back over here. Yes, everything's happy. I didn't wreck anything um, with whatever changes ended up in that package lock. Bunch of package bumps. Cool. Right. So, what would be the best way to sabotage what's going on here? Um, all right, so let's make a simple test change and say, uh, right, uh, we could say it's being reported that counter, yeah, well, it's failing. Reproduce failure. Of course, Claude might get smart and realize that obviously there's a Git diff here, but both counter and app.js are modified. Super. So it's working through. Um, it's going to rebuild the application just in case. That's again something that it has encoded in the CLAUDE.md file from previous runs that it needs to always rebuild before testing, presumably following some loop of failing in the past. There was some part in the last webinar about having a conversation where it was updating the CLAUDE.md with things it had learned. So there was a troubleshooting bit at the end. Oh, which is replaced. That's cute. So what it encountered and then was feeding back into its own CLAUDE.md file to make sure that it learned things for the future. Um, there was a line in the CLAUDE.md file that we had added to try and encourage it to store its learnings there because it was a team project rather than a solo memory project. At the point where we're going to get a failure back, we could probably choose how we direct the agent into fixing this, where we could insist that the test is correct. At the point where we say that no, the test is absolutely correct to fix the application. Or we can spend our time saying right, if we're saying that the application is wrong, let's update the tests. But now generating new tests, like we saw how very quickly this new badly named webinar.yaml got added. At creating tests, even if you're making them by hand using Maestro Studio, creating tests is very, very quick and easy. Um, Being able to maintain your tests at any kind of scale, right? So if it takes you a minute to make a test, then you could have hundreds in a week. Um, then as your application doesn't stop moving, it keeps changing all the time. Maintaining those tests becomes a burden. Using the MCP, you massively, massively reduce that burden. Um, I quite regularly have tests either for myself or for other people I'm helping out, and it's just running quietly in an agent in the background, saying just here's a device, here's a bunch of tests, fix the tests. So long as you've got a decent amount of prior art there, and the Maestro MCP, you'll find that it's very, very quick and easy to get tests fixed up. Um, the slowest part of this seems to have been the build. Everything else appeared to be relatively quick and easy. It's now watching to make sure that waiting for the cloud run to finish. I think if I were doing this for in the real world, I think I would probably change the way that this polling is in my CLAUDE.md file. I feel like this is saying wait 75 seconds for the next poll. There's a lot of tests that don't even take 75 seconds. I think I would probably put in some instructions there about how you would go about actually I want you to poll every 10 seconds max or something like that. And I think that would probably close that loop. And it's deciding on that loop itself. It's like, oh, look at that, 60 seconds, 70 seconds, 75 seconds. So there's an interesting back off that it's deciding to do. Can we flip back over? We can take a look and see what's going on. We're already at the failing step. Hmm. The test is taking a little bit longer because it's been retried automatically by Maestro Cloud as being a potentially flaky test. Sweet. that is one of a number of things that we have rolled out over the last 4 weeks. Again, as part of the maintenance overhead, there are a bunch of people who occasionally hit roadblocks with, we've got a great production system, but our QA environment is absolutely rubbish and we can't spend money to make it better. And so our API requests time out sometimes. And so we'd love to be able to retry those tests. And so what we've implemented is a smart retry system where if you've got a test that fails and the test had on the previous run had succeeded, um, and it's the same test against um, same device, both in terms of model and version, Maestro Cloud will automatically rerun that for you. You can go back and see the original run and go, look, it failed here, and here's the retried run. It failed here, and so now we're going to get a genuine failure back. Of course, it's still doing a nice slow polling. Um, Clearly reproduced, and so now we could give instructions about how to go about that. Um, I think at this point, yeah, you can direct this in any direction we wanted. Like we could. Um, when you're dealing with this at kind of scale, you're probably not dealing with one odd failure. You're probably going to deal with a number of failures per day, given the rate of change that you're going to get, assuming that you're not already dealing with running all of your tests on every PR. Um, you're going to build up a Claude.md file. So we don't publish any Claude skills or agent skills whatsoever. We publish an MCP. We look to publishing skills. The only reason we don't publish skills is because actually your Claude.md file ends up being actually relatively local, relatively specific to you and what you do and how you work. How does a user log in and how do you want your application structured and what should become authoritative and how do you tag things? And so much of it becomes, if we were to publish a skill, it would simply be a tiny thin wrapper around the tools that are in our MCP. And you'd have to extend it anyway. Um, Great. So we can see there that actually it's been able to pull all of the information and timestamps back from the Cloud Run. So if you get something hairier like an application crash, an out of memory, a thing that should have occurred but didn't, or failed API requests, you can see that, yeah, you're able to pull all of that information there. Cool. Um, That's probably, unless anybody has specific requests, that's probably where I want to end in terms of demonstration. The only other things I want to talk about, given that I've dropped a few bits and pieces over the course of this about changes we've been making over the last few weeks. They also wanted to quickly give some shout outs to other bits and pieces that we've changed recently. There's a bunch of people who are doing agentic workflows off the back of using webhooks in Maestro Cloud. As part of that, we've added things like app binary ID and video links and things like that into the webhook to make the webhooks richer and more useful for people who are tying. My CI system starts an upload into Maestro Cloud, but then the webhook is the thing that says like, right, now go fix things, or at least investigate and then let a human know. So we've made some slightly richer webhooks. Again, if there are things that people are going to find useful there, do get in touch. Um, I already talked about smart retries and the improved artifacts. I already talked about the web viewer that we've got in the MCP. Everything else, I think, probably belongs in the open source project. We've removed the Rhino JavaScript engine. We've improved our reporting, both with JUnit and HTML, so you can use HTML reports with Maestro Cloud as well. I don't recommend our HTML reports. I think they're ugly. And I don't think at any point anybody is going to find that that HTML report perfectly matches what you want to do. If I were making a report in 2026, I would have taken those artifacts. I go and find those again. Um, I would take those artifacts there. I would use the commands JSON and the other artifacts that are in there, and I would build my own reporting tool that fitted whatever it was that I wanted to do. Um, um, Other than that, we have better crash detection for Android, because it was one of those things that for a test, for a generic test failure, just saying, "Oh, the text isn't on the screen," isn't as useful as being able to say your application is really broken, it crashed. So one of the things we improved, and the other thing was we fixed, I think, our oldest outstanding issue in the public issue tracker, which is support for Unicode text and emojis on Android. So that's now fixed. There is a hidden custom keyboard packaged inside the driver. And so although we can't send text over ADB, it was a limitation of Android that was stopping us before. We can now instruct the driver to instruct its own keyboard to input those bits of text. And so that is out in Maestro 2.7.0 as of Monday just gone, and already live in Maestro Cloud. Um, Sweet. Reading the button back to zero breaks elements. Still a set reset. Yeah, let's bring them all back to zero. Cool. Um, this is going to carry on chuntering away and isn't going to do anything exciting now. So, any questions?
Cool. Cheers, Dan. Yeah, we've got a few, not many. So the first one we've got is, do you have any plans to make Maestro Studio open source so we can also open PRs for new features or bug fixes?
Interesting. So when we first switched the desktop version, we had a good chat about that. I was at that point arguing in favor of open source everything. It would be great. Um, we ended up not open sourcing everything because we ended up realizing that actually Maestro Studio is pretty boring. It's an Electron wrapper against the same open source project, and then just a bunch of buttons and cloud integrations and the simulator server, which again you can go and find on GitHub. There's nothing in there that if you wanted your own changes, you wouldn't already be able to go and make yourself. And it ends up being another place that we need to maintain and shepherd in the open source community. Given that we're a small company, it ended up being an extra cost that we didn't want to take. Which, I think that's been proven out. The cost of extra PR reviews and stuff. But yeah, at the same time, Maestro Studio does have its own issue tracker on GitHub. So if you have ideas for features, if you come across bugs, definitely do get on GitHub and go and report them in there.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the question, Okan. And we appreciate you wanting to contribute and improve it. So yeah, if you have any product wish list requests or anything, just let us know what you'd like to see. Another question from Okan is, he says, so on cloud, you're actually using iOS simulators and not a real device farm, right? So yeah, Dan, maybe you can just talk about kind of the options that we have available on cloud to test on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maestro Cloud is again relatively boring. It is intentionally boring. It is running Maestro, and we have just some orchestration layers over the top of a massive, massive Mac Mini farm. When you run a test, you are launching an iOS simulator or Android emulator on a Mac Mini that for a period of time is reserved for your use. Um, we looked at physical devices. Physical devices end up being, for a start, prohibitively expensive to get running. Like you need to be a hyperscaler in order to afford the sheer scale. But also, actually, like React Native rendering text doesn't really happen any different on a physical device than what it happens on a virtual device. The only things we've come across where people really do have the need for a physical device is folks with like, I want to be able to do Apple Pay on iOS because Apple unnecessarily gimp their simulators to stop them from having some features. They also don't do push notifications. Those are the only places where certainly I felt the sting as a tester of kind of going like, I've got a few tests that I can't run in Maestro that I would like to be able to. Offering it in cloud ended up looking just so wildly prohibitively expensive, both for us and then the price that we would end up passing on to people. That the actual real testing value, the real new information you get, ends up being really limited. Ends up not being worth it. I think I've answered the question. I can't remember. I spoke for so long there, I might have wandered off track.
Yeah, maybe you could just cover some of what is available on cloud,
Hmm.
kind of like device types, device like screen forms, and operating systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so it's iOS and it's Android. You can do phones and tablets. We cover iOS 16, 17, 18, 26, and Android I want to say 30, but it could be 29, all the way up through 36. We're working on 37 right now. 37 is nerd for Android 17. Um, and again, so they all come with a whole bunch of different um, different screen sizes, different display resolutions, different OS versions. And if you've got the Maestro CLI, you can say Maestro list cloud devices with maybe a few more pixels than that. Get out of the way. Um, and you will get back a list of all of the different combinations that Cloud currently supports is being updated bit by bit. And so, like, if there is an iOS simulator combination that you want or an Android specific, and obviously, like, I mean, the difference between Pixel 9 and Pixel 6, like, there's nothing really special about it. It's just like because it's an emulator. You're talking about screen sizes again. But if there's a combination you want, get in touch. Like, we basically maintain these in a text file. Um, there's nothing particularly exciting about how we do configuration of this stuff. The real value in Maestro Cloud is that actually once the device is booted, we try and turn it into a second use device. Like, you're not going to hit Safari or Chrome's first use nags and all of those kind of things. You want to use Siri Intelligence. No, no, shush. All of that stuff is the stuff that we pat down so that your test runs the same the first time, the second time, the third time runs the same as it does when you're running it locally.
Awesome. Um, yeah, we had a question around supporting iOS physical devices for Maestro Studio and CLI. I just mentioned it was on the roadmap to support there. And then there was another question around in what scenarios is cloud not a good fit for when you want to make testing on a physical device necessary? So I guess what scenarios would
Okay.
you want a physical device?
Yes, I mean, I can give you actually a anecdote. It's not anecdote. It's not funny. I can give you a story. So before I did this, as I was saying, I sat where you were sat, and I worked for a healthcare provider that had an app, and we put 90% of our tests into Maestro Cloud, which was great. The other 10% of the tests were Bluetooth connectivity tests, and so most of those I ran from a cable sat on this desk into a phone, and the phone could do a Bluetooth connection to some, I don't know, blood pressure monitor or whatever that was sat on my desk. Those are the instances there. Not all tests can be run on Maestro Cloud. You can, there are other folks out there who will do it. So you could go to someone like Mobot. They'll do testing with robots, and you can send them like your phone and that blood pressure cuff. You could have sent it to them, and they would have automated it. It will cost a reassuring amount of money, but like absolutely, like there are edge cases there where you can do automation like that. For my quality needs at the time, I chose to use Maestro Cloud for most of it because it also gave us a whole bunch of other benefits and integrated really nicely with how the team was working. And then for the last few percent of the tests, yeah, running it using the local CLI with physical devices works really well. I've mentioned those iOS physical device edge cases. I think those are real. There's not a lot we can do at Maestro about fixing that. Giving support for iOS physical devices is really non-trivial. So there's a few folks who have tried opening PRs and kind of gone like, I've solved a third of the problem, but not the tricky two-thirds about like how do you do things like wiping data for an application on a running device when you're dealing with Apple's physical device sandboxes and things like that. So there are hard problems to be solved there, but they are ones that we want to solve because there is a gap there. Hoping I've covered all the different bits that cloud wouldn't be suitable. Obviously, if you're doing like national security stuff, don't use Maestro Cloud. You definitely shouldn't. If you're doing anything that's illegal, don't use Maestro Cloud either. These are some edge cases.
Thanks for clarifying on the illegal activities there.
No worries.
We have a question around can we also test audio, e.g., playing a track, I imagine music track?
That is a question I have heard surprisingly often, and it's something I keep meaning to go and tinker with. I imagine there is a way to do microphone input. I bet we could simulate that. Detecting audio output, I imagine to be far more difficult. I don't know. This can't be a new problem in mobile testing. People must have tackled this before. I'd be surprised if Android and iOS haven't tackled it. It's just never something that's hit the top of my list. Maestro doesn't do this today, but it would be great if it did. If there's not already an open issue on the tracker, open one, talk about your use cases, talk about like, I want to be able to push a button and hear a noise, or I want to be able to detect the noise, or like talk about what it is you want to achieve. But yeah, that sounds like a fun weekend project at some point. Don't tell my wife.
We have an interesting one here. I've asked to clarify kind of a bit more around the scenario here. Shai is asking, is it possible to aggregate test results from locally owned devices and have them reported in Maestro Cloud dashboards, or is cloud reporting limited to devices provided by Maestro?
Yes, the second one. So all the stuff you see on the dashboard is tests that are stored in our database. So after you've had your run, so you have these runs. These runs can succeed or fail, and then this dashboard here contains only stuff that's local. You could, though, at the end of every run, you'll get a webhook, or you can use the MCP to pull those results down, and you could merge those. So given what I was showing, I keep closing the damn window. Um, so where you've got the commands JSON and this information here, that is really similar to what you're going to get with a local run as well. You could absolutely absorb all of this stuff together and maintain your own merged database of local and cloud runs. That's probably the way that I would approach that if I were doing that today. But I have only given it 5 seconds of thought.
Yeah, makes sense. Quite an unusual use case, but yeah,
Yeah,
definitely possible.
obviously. So the way when I was talking about the previous scenario, where I was talking about like I want to, I've got some Bluetooth tests I need to run locally. At that point, I was using the webhook and local JUnit and munging it all and shoving it all into TestRail. I don't wish that on anybody. Don't do that.
Cool. Mohammed asks, so these are all about like simulating different environments on a device. So he's asking, can I simulate 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, high latency, packet loss, network drops, and can I switch networks during a test?
Mostly no, 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 and no. So Maestro intentionally stays away from networking. We don't monitor your networking. We don't interfere. We don't. The closest we do is we will proxy each device out through one point in Maestro Cloud so that you're able to allow list on your firewall 1 or 2 or 3 IP addresses, and so all device traffic goes through there. We looked for a while at doing like API mocking and network conditioning. actually being able to integrate with all the different ways that all the different application frameworks, all the different operating systems work, especially on iOS. iOS makes it really difficult because you need to modify the Mac, not the iOS device, because it's not a real device, it's simulated. Um, Being able to do that in a way that works for everyone is incredibly difficult. And so instead of doing some of it, we decided doing nothing was better than doing a bad job. Um, that being said, there are folks who stand up publicly accessible network conditioners, or they stand up mocks or proxies for their applications, and they use those, and so that then gets them the ability to get some of what you're talking about. Obviously, if you're standing up a proxy or a mock, or even a partial mock, you're going to get your high latency for free. Um, but yes, it's something I'd like to be able to do. Finding a way, it's basically waiting for Apple to allow that within the simulator in a way that isn't, that gives the flexibility. The only thing that I know is there right now is that we're on Android devices, you can flap airplane mode on and off. That's the closest thing you can get to where you have that ability to do networking. At the same time, if folks have got ideas, come and chat on the issue tracker about like, here's my use case and here's how I think it could be done. I'm all ears.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I've seen another customer effectively use like a debug menu within their app where they have used like launch arguments to basically simulate offline connectivity. So they're effectively blocking the network requests to be able to kind of simulate some of this offline behavior.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Baking the testability into the application. Um, Given that you were probably detecting network state anyway, you could always just return it because it's probably not the network condition you care about. It's about how your application responds to it and that kind of business logic layer. So yeah,
Yeah. Constantine asks, hey, how can we test iOS 27 before it comes out?
good shape. Yes, we should get iOS 27 running in cloud. Um, I have not been following iOS 27, but I imagine I know the Xcode beta is already out, so there must be some betas. I've got no idea how far we are from release now. But yeah, it would be great to get iOS 27 into cloud before it launches. So for exactly that reason. Yes, I will go and look at that today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think it's normally a September kind of drop for the new iOSs.
Oh,
And
sweet.
this one's supposed to be relatively bug-free and stable, unusually. So Mohammed also asks, is there the ability to perform app update testing? Please talk a little bit about that.
Hmm. There isn't, and that seems like that's a gap as well. Even if I were trying to do that locally, you would find it difficult because the only way I could think to do that would be to fire up a browser, download the APK, then install the APK over the top. So on Android, I could see very quickly and easily being able to add bits to Maestro to be able to kind of go like, right, install me another app over the top from this folder. Um, iOS, I've got no idea how hard it would be to install over the top to be able to say, like, here's my old version, get me to this point in my old version, then install that over the top. Um, Again, I feel like that's not going to be cloud specific. I feel like that's something that CLI should support. Again, if there's not already an issue in the tracker, go make one. Talk about those use cases, like where's the value? What is it? What is it you would want the test to be able to do, rather than just like app updates. Like talk about like I want to drive it to that state and then install it from a file or a website or whatever. But yeah, definitely if there's not an issue there already, get one open because yeah, that is a gap, and that I think would be useful.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess also it's potentially possible with OTA, so over the air updates, in that you could launch your app and kind of pull the update over the air and then verify that your update had taken place as
Yeah,
a use
absolutely.
case.
Yeah. I imagine that's also the case with EAS or what was the old one? Cordova hydration. Showing my age a little bit. Sorry. Um, but yes, all versions of that. yeah, you would be able to test those so long as you had the ability to trigger that OTA.
Yeah. It looks like we have a live question from Jonathan. So hopefully he's here. And yeah, go ahead and ask your question, Jonathan. We're hoping you intentionally raised your hand. You might need to unmute to ask your question. Oh, no, you made a mistake. Never mind. Well, you're on the floor. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Next question is, can Maestro connect to a VPN to perform a test?
No, no, that's the same thing with the networking. Yes, we could absolutely do it for Android inside Maestro Cloud. We can't do it for iOS because at the point where you VPN your Mac to it, because the iOS device doesn't have any networking, at the point where you do the Mac then loses the ability to interact with everything else within the network. It becomes a massive headache. Also, which VPNs do support, given all the different corporate ones. And so at the moment, we've kept it to allow lists. Um, I think the demand would have to be really high for us to invest in the networking to do VPN stuff. So previously, we found that some high regulation folks have initially had some problems with that. We find for almost everybody that disappears when you kind of go like, it's a test app with test data. Like by and large, most folks, most banking, healthcare, um, yeah, have not had any real opposition to it once you speak to their InfoSec folks.
Shai has asked, I noticed disable animations is a cloud-only command. Is that because it requires some sort of privileged access to the device, or is there another technical reason it can't be supported locally?
I think disable animations is supported locally.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's just a config setting that you can set, and isn't cloud particular.
Yep.
Um, there
Um,
is a second part of that question, which is also quite interesting, where he's asking, are there any other commands that are cloud exclusive?
ooh, is there anything you can do on cloud that you couldn't do locally? So the smart retries are in the cloud, and webhooks are in the cloud, and that kind of the dashboards that we've got are there. The only other thing I think there's that device configuration is in the cloud where you say like, great, I want to pre-configure Chrome so I don't get the first use. All of that is cloud specific because it's how we condition those devices as they boot, which is slightly more involved than the Maestro start device command. Um, but in terms of commands, no, there's nothing that's specific to the cloud. There are some AI commands that are well, they're a bit so-so, if I'm honest. But like extract text with AI or whatever, assert with AI, those commands use a cloud service, but you can run them locally. That's the closest I can get to a yes. So, but I'm going to stick with no.
Mohammed also asks, does the platform support testing tvOS apps and Android apps on the Google TV streamer device?
No. Android TV will almost certainly work locally anyway. If you have a look on GitHub, the nice folks from Plex have a PR for tvOS that we are probably not going to merge because we probably don't have the demand in there to take on that maintenance. But it's definitely worth looking at the work they've done because they've done an enormous, lovely amount of work. I don't know whether they're going to maintain a fork or something, but it exists out there, but they do not support it on cloud.
Thank you. Looks like we're at the end of the questions now. I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here as we had a request earlier from Marek to say, can we see similar tests using Maestro Studio in this webinar? So yeah, I don't know if you can just maybe launch and show one of these tests in there and how it would look and just really like a minute or two briefly on how it kind of works mirroring your device and inserting commands, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me just a sec to get a. Right, so that is Studio with the same folder open. So all I've done is open the E2E flows folder, but there's those bits and pieces. Find a device. What's my close? What do you reckon? 30, 30, let's guess at 34 and hope that this is going to boot up and it's going to have the counter app already running on it. That'd be great. What I'll do whilst I'm over here. Yeah, look at that. I love a bit of guessing. Right, let's just create a scratch file. And it's gonna, where's my counter app? Yes. So I'm not gonna ignoring all of the others. So if I get to here, I can either hit run test here or I can run from here. Um, and that gets you your app in your default state. From there, so that's the default test I get when I create a new file. From there, I'm now looking at all these elements that I can do. All I'm doing is mousing over at this point. If I right click on this one, I can tap on increment. I can copy it, I can insert it into the test, or I can insert and run at the same time. So when I do that, it gets added here, then run up in the top right there. And so I know that as I'm building my test up step by step, I've got a really high confidence that that is going to then that's going to look. So if I tap on reset and then that's not two. Right. So then I will run from here. Going to tap increment twice, see that it's got two. Tap on reset, see that it's got zero. And so building tests like that is dead easy. Obviously, I've built all of that just the mouse, no keyboard, and no keyboard involved at all there. Hopefully, I've kind of shown what it was you were after. If not, I would say have a look at our YouTube channel. Both me and I know Simon has done one as well. Going back some months, we've done like end-to-end demos of like from nothing to full suite in studio. So I'm sure one of those will be on our YouTube channel. Um, if you're lucky, it'll be Simon rather than me.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. And sorry for putting you on the spot, but yeah, hopefully, Marek, you can see there how quick and easy it is to get Studio running, mirror your device, inspect elements, and just start building a test. Super quick and simple. So yeah, should have everything you need there.
I will quickly plug obviously the studio, all of this that so you're looking at here. This is all entirely free software. We've talked about Maestro a hell of a lot. Maestro is open source and is done on a permissive license. So if you've got a company that has GPL problems, you wouldn't have any of those with Maestro. And then we've also used Maestro Cloud a bunch. Maestro Cloud is a fee-paid service, but there is a 1 week trial that you can go and get. I've used the MCP. The question we get a lot with MCP is how much the MCP costs. The MCP is entirely free and it's part of the open source project. So you can go and look at the codes in the MCP. It's not leaking any of your information. If anything's leaking out of your MCP, it's coming from Claude.
Perfect. Okay, which pretty much brings us to the hour. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone attending today. You can head to our website, maestro.dev, and find pretty much everything you need there. Links to the docs, links to the cloud, and then there's also a community tab where you can join our Slack as well. Or Dan's sharing the URL there, and I think Manu shared it in the channel earlier. And yeah, thanks to the lovely Manu for hosting this webinar and inviting everyone, and Dan for running through all the content today and answering all of the questions. Yeah, come find us in Slack and ask us any further questions that you have. We'd love to chat in there.
100%.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Simon.
everyone. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Simon.
Bye,
Bye
everyone.
bye.